Hello, my test.
1, 2, 3.
Ten years ago, we see Protons merely a national car makers in Malaysia. We can't see any clear about Protons except its visions. Until 5 years ago, we could see the rigorous expansion of Proton, especially after the synergy of DRB Highcom and Geely. But will Proton always be the automotive leader in the future 5 years? So in our presentations, we would like to present about our problem statements. Next, follow-up will be the solution framework and its implementation. And lastly, will be the risks and mitigations. So in our problem statements, from the data that we retrieve, we realize that the Proton loses to BYDs in terms of the growth rates and loses to Perodua in terms of the sales volume. So in terms of the growth rate, we could see that Protons have higher growth rate as compared to Perodua, its nearest competitors. However, BYD have a significant higher growth rate even than the Protons. And in terms of the sales volume, we could see that Protons has the least sales volume compared to Perodua and BYD. So the actions that required for Protons to take further is to overtake Perodua in the total unit sales and to emulate BYD's actions in terms to match the growth rate. Next, we would like to further break down the Proton's growth problems into the three main barrels. The first barrels is the policy barrels, the second barrels will be the internal barrels, and the third barrels will be the market barrels. So firstly, in the policy barrels, we would like to point out the two pain points of this barrel would be the electric vehicle EV adoptions and infrastructures, as well as the autonomous driving AD regulations. So there are two questions we would like to point out to Protons, which is how should Proton advocate for EV policies, as well as how to encourage the acceptance of AD in the domestic and international markets. So in the second barrels, which is the internal barrels, there are three pain points that we pin out for Protons. Firstly is the management and people. Second is the products and operation. And lastly would be the financial considerations. So under each pain points, we would also like to further out the key questions for Protons, which are how Proton to improve the talent management, what future products and where to produce them, and also how to raise capital for the large shifts. And the last barrels will be the market barrels. We point out two pain points, which is competitors and the target markets. So the key questions that we would like to highlight is how to Proton's edge over its competitors, as well as how should Proton approach the domestics as well as international markets. So firstly, in terms of the policy barrels, we would like to further out to see the policies available in Malaysia. So at the left side is the projected policies outcomes from the Malaysian governments, and on the left side, would be the current outcomes in the current markets. So we found out that the Malaysian government is unlikely to meet the set targets of EV infrastructures as well as the adoptions. Say for example, in Malaysian policy, it is projected to install 10,000 EV charging stations across the nation by 2025. However, according to a research on the dashboard of Plant Malaysia, it currently have installation of 2,020 units of charging stations all across Malaysia. Also, another examples would be Malaysian government is projected to have 125 units of EV on the road by 2030. However, in the reality, it's only more than 16,000 units of EVs on the road by 2023. Also, in the policy barriers, we would like to further to benchmark to compare Malaysia as well as to other Asian countries. So according to the countries that we compare to is Singapore, Thailand and Indonesia. So these are the countries that have higher readiness in terms of the EV adoptions. So in Singapore, there are higher charging stations compared to Malaysia. It shows that the strong support from the government in terms of the EV adoptions. And in Indonesia have massive or key materials for the EV charging stations. Therefore, it provides advantage for this country to have higher adoption compared to Malaysia's. So second barriers will be the internal barriers. So after we conduct the internal factors evaluation matrix, the score allocated for protons is 2.6. It is above the average points. So we summarize out 3 points to highlight to protons. Firstly is the management and people. Second is the product offerings, and third will be the operation activities. So firstly, in the management and people, we would like to highlight that the lack of professionals for the new energy sector is a critical issue even though there is a new energy roadmap within protons. The production of the EVs is highly depends on the well management and also the skilled employees. Second is the product offering. Proton must leverage their strengths in connections with Geely and their capacities to improve products and operations. Thirdly is operational activities. Proton is in need of addressing the value chain management to ensure best pricing for lower cost of productions, which this also actually linked back with our previous slides where the demands from the overall Asian country is quite low due to the high upfront payment for the EVs. So the main key takeaways in these slides will be Proton needs to focus on addressing its current weaknesses. However, the current strength that protons available still possess a higher chance for Proton's success in EV. Last but not least, the last barrier will be the market barrier. So after we overcome the external factor evaluation matrix, the score is 3.31. It's definitely higher than average scores. So in this matrix, we found out that Proton's internationalization has a room for expansions amongst its competitors. So as the same things, we summarize our 3 main points that we wish to highlight. Firstly, it's about the competitors. Second is about the domestic markets, and thirdly is about the international markets. So firstly, in the competitors, Proton is behind among competitors for making a name in the new energy sectors. We say so this is due to the strong competitions in the market from the BYD as well as Tesla. Second is the domestic market. The high support from the government actually support the growth of protons. However, we should not ignore the nearest competitors of proton, Perodua. Thirdly is the international markets. Threats linger in international markets from the readiness of the infrastructures, as we analyzed before, up to the perceptions of the customers, the high upfront payments.
Okay, thank you, Lee Sing, for outlining the issues and breaking it down very clearly for all of us to see. The question now then is, what do we want to achieve in order to solve these issues? What do we want to actually do? So the objective of this accelerated action plan is for us to grow, overtake Perodua, our nearest competitor, and hopefully mark the future of Proton's position as a leader in the new energy sector. So in order to achieve this objective, we've outlined 3 significant strategy pillars. What you see in front of you is pillar number 1, which is to advocate, dealing with the policy barriers. Strategy number 2, which is to transform, dealing with the internal barriers that exist within Proton. And then thirdly is to capture, dealing with the market barriers. So, under each of these pillars are the key players and key target markets, key targets that we want to try and influence and action against them. So, the outcome deliverables of each of these pillars is the first one regarding policy, are the policy recommendations and proposals we'll make in order to achieve policy change. Second is the internal policy documents that we'll try to implement and implement throughout all of Proton in order to appeal to every employee as well as potential employees. And the third one is market research for us to better understand the potential areas that we can enter to tap into their market and potentially increase profits and increase sales. So let's get directly into each of these solutions, right? So the first one is in terms of the policy solution that we want to have. What is it that we mean by advocating? Advocating under this plan involves the mobilization of 3 important parties. One is the policymakers themselves, which we think the most significant one here are the Ministry of Transport of Malaysia. Second involves educating the public such that they understand the benefits of EV and they understand why is it that they have a significant role to play in trying to shift the government to adopt EV policies as well. And then secondly is the corporate as well as industry players that we have. And this, like Mr. Amran mentioned just now, is not just the producers of not just automakers, but as well as the other sub-businesses like EV charging infrastructure facilities as well. So, what is it that we want to do in regards to the policymakers, the ministry? I think there are several actions that we want to take, but the most significant one is to conduct lobbying in order for us to support significant figures within the political parties or within these political frameworks that exist, in order for us to systematically and strategically show the pain points that we can address and how Proton plays in those areas. The second is in terms of educating the public. What we want to do is potentially launch campaigns and launch marketing promotional videos for you to understand what is it that the EVs of Proton can do and why is it that the public should try and adopt these as well, and they should push for this change. And then finally, in terms of the automakers, we think a significant action to take is to conduct MOUs or memorandums of understanding and collaborate with many players of the industry, not just automakers, but as well as EV infrastructure providers as well. The key takeaway from this slide then is the fact that Proton should be the leader in trying to mobilize all of these 3 stakeholders in trying to push for policy changes with the Malaysian government to make the situation on market condition in Malaysia more appealing for the new energy sector. Now then, onto the second solution, we want to try and push for the internal changes in Proton. It revolves around 3 main areas, which is the first one, the organizational culture that exists within Proton and trying to change the corporate values, or change is not perhaps the most accurate word, but rather evolve the existing TARI values into something like TARING to incorporate values of innovation and growth. The second is in terms of product R&D. I think the development of the key propositions that Proton has, the mobiles, like the X50 and the X70, into something more appealing towards the people with the new features and new design, for example, will be something incredibly important. And then finally is in terms of establishing operational nodes. Establishing operational nodes deal mainly with the supply chain, as Mr. Amran said just now as well. We're dealing with end-to-end. We need to think about what happens before the production as well, and we think the operational nodes is a significant factor. This involves automation in the process. This involves allowing for the employees to be upskilled in order to deal with all of these differences in automation when it is in the workforce. So the key takeaway here is the fact that in order for Proton to grow the internal factors, they need to shift their values and they need to put innovation and growth at the forefront of their focus. Now, the final solution that we have is to capture and develop the markets that we have. So in trying to understand the markets, I think Lysian has outlined the 3 main barriers or the 3 main breakdowns, which is the fact that we want to try and address the competitors and try to be in front of them. And then secondly is trying to understand the domestic markets, and then finally is trying to identify the international markets that we can break into in order for us to increase the revenues that we have. So firstly, in terms of the competitors, we want to identify how is it that we can try to be as good as them, or in terms of this case BYD, what is it that they did in order for them to have such large growth rate and how are we able to better emulate that. That can be in the terms of product features, that can be in terms of operational growth as well, or that can be in terms of the culture that they have. We think trying to identify these things and try to emulate them is incredibly important. Secondly, in terms of the domestic market, we need to analyze who are the key players here and what are they lacking. I think knowing the fact that the significant amount of our challenges, like BYD, like Proton, like Toyota, all exist under UMW Holdings or under SIMW right now, and we think the RB HiCom is a significant advantage when we have collaborations with GD, and we think that is something that's going to leverage us and try to take the next step, at least in trying to gain market share within the domestic market. Finally, in terms of international markets, we think that trying to understand Southeast Asia as a whole and how is it that the preferences of the customers there, what are the rules and regulations that exist within these markets, will allow for Proton to have a better entry point. So what are the entry mechanisms that we are going to have is going to be largely dependent on the markets themselves, but some options are some mergers and acquisitions with existing companies that exist over there, or some other sub-business divisions for us to at least begin the production within those international markets. So now, let's move into the further breakdown of these strategies into what are the key actions and the key steps that we are going to take in order to implement these things. We proposed a 5-year roadmap in order for us to understand what are the key milestones of each of these strategies in trying to achieve the objective that we have set earlier on. So, it is broken down into the 3 main strategies that we have: to advocate, to transform, and to capture, and it is further broken down into milestones of every year. So I think let's head into the first one of the advocacy. We want to, in the first year, establish foundations, and this is revolving around establishing specialized task force and collaborating with key partners in order for us to develop better policy recommendations, and that involves think tanks and that involves media to shape public perception. The specific examples that we have right now are, for example, the Khazanah Research Institute, or for example, Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, like IDS in Malaysia. We think these are 2 key players, or 3 key players, in order for us to better understand the policy and public policy divisions within Malaysia. Finally, in terms of collaborating with the media, we think Proton is doing significantly well in this anyways, but of course, we can have improvements along the way. So now then, to further elaborate on the advocacy year plan, year number two, we want to conduct research and testing, and this is where we conduct pilot plans to have autonomous driving, for example, or to have autonomy built into our facilities in order for us to show how is it that workers are either not in place or there are significant safety benefits as a consequence of autonomous driving. And we think these are the key thrusts that we want to push onto the policy in order for us to make those changes. So, in the year 3, as a result of our conduct and research, as a result of conducting research and testing, is when we want to try and initiate the pushes for policy changes. This is where the lobbying happens. This is where we develop the proper proposals and roadmaps in order for us to try and implement and propose to other industries as well for them to contribute towards this roadmap. And we think year 3 is where the significant amount of efforts is going to accrue. Year 4 is where we implement the actions of the roadmap, where we are going to conduct the first phase of commercialization, or to us to conduct real due diligence of the actions that we've had and any outlining issues that we've had in the implementation process. Final year, which is year 5, we're going to establish feedback mechanisms and publish the feedback and publish the outcomes in order for us to continue the development of these things. Now, the second one is in terms of transformation. I think it's pretty clear on what we want to do in trying to transform the organizational culture. We want to identify the needs we're going to want to develop, and the most important here as well is the capacity building aspect, where we want to try and maintain the workers that we have right now in order for them to make them applicable to the new values that we want to try and hold, in order for them to make them adaptable and flexible to any potential changes that the market demands of them. And the year 4 and year 5 is similar to the first strategy. We want to publish and outreach, and the 5th year is to review. Finally, in terms of capturing, in terms of the market, how is it that we're going to want to try and achieve the objectives of this strategy? Is firstly to conduct research within the first year, identify the potential markets as well as the potential entry mechanisms that we have. Second is the engagements that we've had. This is where we sit down and begin talks on how is it that we want to actually enter those markets and what are the business areas that we want to develop in those areas. The third one is to actually penetrate those markets through mergers and acquisitions. And then the final one, to grow and to continue on effort as well. And this is dependent on the situation at that time. And I think I'll pass this to Lisen to continue again.
Alright, thank you, Muiz. Last but not least will be the risk management framework. So on the left side is the risk identification that we done. So in the actions of transform, there are 2 risks that we identified. First is the employee resist change, and second is the financial barriers. Second action is to advocate. Three risks that we identify is, firstly is the MOU conflict of interest. Second is the failure to generate public support, and lastly is the policy shutdown. Lastly, in the actions of capture, we identify one risk, which is market entry failure. So over the right side is the risk matrix that according to the Harvard Business Review report. So we segregate the risk according to the livelihood and also the impact. So the contingency plan that we propose for each plan, for each risk will be, firstly, under the actions of transform, for the risk of employee resist change, we would like to suggest Proton to conduct regular feedback systems to understand the point of resistance. Second, for the financial barriers, we suggest Proton to conduct accurate preliminary budgeting with high contingency fund for high-risk activities. Second, for action of advocate, for the MOU conflict of interest, we will suggest Proton to establish clear expectations and benefits of MOU, seeking to prioritize collective collaboration. And second, for the risk of failure to generate public support, we will suggest Proton to revise approach, conducting key opinion leader support. And lastly, for the policy shutdown, we will suggest Proton to establish proper lobbying protocols and secondary options. Lastly, for the actions of capture, we would like to suggest Proton to establish clear divestiture protocols and standards and implement them appropriately in the risk of market entry failure. So that's all for our presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, judges. I'm sorry. A sincere thank you to solution seekers for initiating the presentation. Now, esteemed judges, we invite your thoughtful inquiries.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I would say overall, you have considered almost all factors. If only you can clarify more on how you prioritize the key or the big blocks year on year in the implementation plan, in your 5-year plan.
To clarify your question, how should we prioritize the big milestones that we want to achieve and the allocation of resources? Is that correct? Okay, so I think firstly to acknowledge is the fact that these strategies will probably work in parallel with each other, and they are changes that are not necessarily mutually exclusive of each other. So to directly answer your question is what to prioritize. I think we would prioritize in considering two main factors: the feasibility and the outcome. So we will prioritize actions that have easier feasibility and greater outcome. So in other words, matching the 80-20 rule. So we think to directly give an answer, we think one of the priorities we want to achieve is the transformational challenges, the internal policies, because ultimately the ones that are going to try and make all of these actions are Proton. And I think if Proton is able to make significant shifts in the transformation, the leadership and the management of its employees, the other actions will subsequently become much easier to implement as well. So the milestones will follow accordingly to the plan that we implemented just now. Yes.
The second one is not a question but rather a comment, which is good for your team to touch on the organization culture. So I hope the team can look further moving forward. We'll touch on organization culture.